Hello and welcome back to our Talking with Apes podcast, the podcast where we discuss a new socio-political topic every week. Today we are here with our 12th episode to talk about a topic everyone has heard about, I assume, if you're like the kind of person that listens to political podcasts at least. Today we will talk about Afghanistan and more specifically, of course, the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. Like all troops from Afghanistan, really, and the victory of the Taliban. Now, if we're going to talk about the whole, future of a country, maybe we should also look at its past for a moment. And we have a history teacher among us. So, Tom, why don't you take it away?
Okay. Yeah. It says, as one of the sources that we consult said, Mo Magazine, an old international conflict takes a sudden turn, but does not disappear immediately. So read history if the future interests you. So I'll give a short overview of the history of Afghanistan. If you are already familiar with it, I suggest you click ahead so you don't make yourself despair even more than you already have to, considering the situation.
Just go to the second hour of this podcast.
No, we'll go over it. Very minimalistically. Let's start in 1973, which is when Afghanistan had a king still, and which was a time when the country was faced with political instability because the king was unwilling to sign laws, so parliament couldn't operate, and a power struggle followed. That situation was ended by a bloodless coup by Mohammed Daoud Khan, the nephew of the king, if I'm not mistaken. You said Kenan?
I don't know names.
Okay. He established the Republic of Afghanistan.
There's a lot of names in our research, to be fair.
A lot of names. But his the person who led the coup against the king was his cousin indeed.
Yeah. So he established the Republic of Afghanistan, which tried to move away from both the US and the USSR, at the moment still existed, and tried to form a closer band with Muslim countries. He was in turn ousted by the 1978 coup by the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, a Marxist-Leninist party that installed a revolutionary council headed by Nur Mohammad Taraki. In 1979, they were overthrown by one of the deputies, Hafizullah Amin, whose reign was very short because after that the Soviet Union basically invaded to make sure that the country remained a socialist or communist state. They installed their own puppet government led by Barbak Karmal, which became increasingly unpopular because the communists started to do what the communists did, which was strip away everything relating to religion and specific cultural traditions, which of course angered the population, which in that time was still very much entrenched in their historic power struggle.
But at the same time, there was also, if we're just stating facts right now, this is not connected to any opinion about the ideology of the Soviet Union or whatever. It's just the Soviets also invested heavily in education,
we're the ones that forced
infrastructure,
or that forced women to go to school.
Basically, they did mandatory education, something that has been if you look at any modern history country, once you have mandatory education, you have a better educated population, and that's usually a good thing.
The Soviet government was opposed by the Mujahideen parties, who rebelled, translating to people who fight for Islam in direct opposition to what the Soviets were doing.
Indeed, holy fighters.
Yeah,
that's the literal translation.
But in their power system, because they formed the interim government when the Soviet Union then fell, and they formed the interim government, but one of their parties was refusing to give up power to said interim government, and they were fighting a lot amongst themselves. Following, political instability followed, corruption followed, and that is the power vacuum in which we see the Taliban arise for the first time. Taliban translating to students as they grew out of Islamic educational schools. They received funding from the public and support for a while because they were in opposition to the corruption and instability of the Mujahideen. They booked pretty big and fast successes. They started with the takeover of Kandahar in the south of Afghanistan, made rapid progress, and after 2 years, they basically controlled Kabul and the majority of the country. Except
Kabul
for
being the capital.
Yes,
being the
Kabul
capital,
being the
yes.
capital of Afghanistan.
They had trouble with one city, Mazar-e-Sharif, which was one that resisted occupation. But after one of the generals there killed thousands of Taliban prisoners, the Taliban retaliated with at least equal, vileness. The Taliban attacked in 1998 and shot everything and everyone that they considered to be not them, including children. 8,000 innocents probably died. That's the estimate we have. And they didn't allow the dead to be buried for 6 days, leaving them to be eaten by dogs in the streets under
Lovely.
the hot sun. In 2001, and that's probably the point which many people are still familiar with, Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization, attacked the US and destroyed the Twin Towers.
9/11.
9/11, yes, in which 3,000 Americans died. And the Taliban, at that point in control of Afghanistan, refused to give Al-Qaeda forces to the US when they demanded it.
They had Osama bin Laden basically hiding. Was
Yeah.
it Afghanistan or Pakistan? I don't know. But basically, they demand, like the US demanded Osama bin Laden personally to be extradited and to be.
But also, the US demanded to get proof that Osama bin Laden had been part of the attack or like had been related to the attack, which the Taliban did not want to give them just for nothing. And that's how it happened. And
Yes,
then the US declared war.
The US, and they brought along a coalition of NATO.
Yes.
The US indeed invaded, managed to take a lot of ground pretty quickly, though there is much to be said about the military strategy and everything involved in that sense. There have been a lot of critics of that entire operation, and not unrightfully so. As the US and their coalition were basically taking ground in Afghanistan, and a number of Afghan groups met in Bonn in Germany and made an agreement to form an interim government, which the US backed, and that is the government that would later develop into the central Afghan, nation-state government that is now being ousted.
It already has been.
Has been ousted, yeah. I mean, it completely is gone indeed. By late 2001, though, the Taliban had lost and surrendered basically Kandahar and was forced to go underground, though they by no means ever completely were gone.
The Americans were never able to military-wise uproot Taliban or Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
No.
It has never been actually done.
They went underground.
They always went
started
underground for the new
guerrilla
leader,
tactics.
do guerrilla tactics again.
And by 2016 already they controlled 20% of the territory again,
Yes.
which by 2017 meant that about half of the people of Afghanistan, of that territory, were living under either Taliban rule or in a place where the Taliban was open and existed clearly. Because the Taliban started to make agreements and deals with the pretty weak central Afghan government that the US had backed. And in 2018, we see the Trump administration of the United States start talks with the Taliban and the Afghan government, which resulted in the 2020 Doha Agreement. And we're getting closer to the present. The Doha Agreement says that the US would withdraw by May 2021. The Taliban would not harbor terrorists anymore. Peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government would continue, and a prisoner exchange would follow. The prisoner exchange went mostly from the side of the central government, as they released 5,000 people and the Taliban only 1,000. And it was pretty much immediately clear the Taliban had no interest in actually following up on that agreement, since in the first 45 days after it was made, the Taliban basically made like 4,500 attacks, which is a 70% increase compared to the year before. So they really amped it up. And they started to surround provincial capitals, so the central cities of the provinces, where the US was slowly withdrawing. Biden seeing or getting notified by his the Biden administration then in power in 2021 got noticed by their security services that May would be a very early withdrawal and that they should extend the deadline. He unilaterally did, meaning he did it without consulting the Taliban or the Afghan government. He extended it to September 11, which the Taliban completely rejected. And after May 11, the original date, they started to really amp up their offenses. They started to attack 7 major provinces, and between May and June, they had 2,000 civilians who were wounded and killed already. By the 15th of August, the Taliban basically was back in control of the entirety of Afghanistan, except for a few places like Kabul Airport and one specific province, which remains till this day unoccupied. And with control, we mean full control. They have the administrative centers, they have the police headquarters, they have the government institutions, they have all major border crossings in and out of the country. In Kabul Airport, which is one of the places that till this day of recording is still being controlled by Western forces, the West started to create an air bridge to get their own citizens as well as some people they considered at risk or indebted.
The airport is also being kept by the Western forces because the Taliban, it was part of the agreement, or like the last minute kind of fraction of an agreement where the Taliban was like, okay, this part we will not try to invade. So
and basically all major countries started to create air bridges, getting their people to neighboring countries before shipping them back to their places. Yeah. That is coming to an end. Belgium's air bridge, for example, has ended. That stuff has happened. The UN Refugee Agency, to cap this off, has described the human toll of the hostilities as immense. More than 18 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. That is half the population of Afghanistan, at least. And they basically cite conflict, the corona pandemic, and drought as reasons for this, and it has led basically to the displacements of millions of Afghans. But we'll talk about that in the rest of the podcast. That is
and the people that got out through the air bridges did not include local activists, etc. That
it was
working
really
with US or other countries,
foreign countries themselves, or people that were very closely linked to them,
like
and
for example,
the luck
translators
of getting to Kabul in time.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a very brief and very minimalistic overview of countries.
I do think before we kind of end the discussion of the history of Afghanistan, I think it's important to look into whether it was justified to invade this country in the first place. So after 9/11. The US refused to give the Taliban any sort of proof or evidence that they needed to arrest Osama bin Laden. They just wanted to have him handed over immediately within a couple of days, and the Taliban refused that, and then they just declared full-on war. Which is not how it usually.
And while the Taliban's refusal to hand over Osama bin Laden or any other Al-Qaeda forces and proof, etc., is the official reason it's cited.
But even that, even if you just look at that, isn't it a bit crazy to be like, if you don't give us this person that lives within your country without us giving you any proof that he is really guilty, within a couple of days,
of course,
we will just declare war on you. Even that alone is pretty I don't know, pretty extreme already.
It is.
Well, yes, that is crazy. But we have, that's on the other hand, it's no more crazy than the entire thing that kicked off World War I, which was basically an investigation into the death of the Austrian prince, and in which the Austrian-Hungarians demanded complete and full access and to lead the investigation.
Yes, but that
And the
was not
Serbs said
portrayed as a
no.
human. That was not portrayed as a humanitarian act.
No,
though,
I mean, but
which
at
the
first-
U.S. did pitch this as a bit.
Yes, but only afterwards. In the beginning, they were very much open and clear about their totally imperialistic, vengeful nature of the matter. But aside from that, the U.S. might have cited that as a reason. The behind the scenes decision making process probably included a few other things, including that one, their grand strategy, which comes down to making sure that India or China doesn't develop as competition to them on the world stage. They constantly play countries out against each other in the Afghanistan conflict. So do many of the players involved. It is basically constantly trying to pit people against each other. A second reason is regional control. The US is, of course, very dubious about one, Iran in the neighborhood, and two, Pakistan and its nuclear ability and the instability in the country concerning the nuclear power of the country. That is a worrisome development for them. And then there is also the fact that the war in Afghanistan was a pretty good reason for the US to continue NATO after, or at least, I'm quoting a professor of the Sorbonne University here. Let me get his name. Gilles Doronsoro, professor of political sciences at the Sorbonne in Paris, who pointed out that the reason after World War II, the European powers basically saw a little interest in NATO. The defensive alliance was no longer necessary because the enemy was defeated, etc. But for Washington, it was way more interesting to maintain the alliance and continue to have a grip over the European powers, or at least make sure that they don't fully develop themselves again militarily, so that the US could continue to dictate where interventions would take place and how. And the Afghan war was a pretty grand example for them to prove that NATO was needed, and that in a sense that NATO was going to defend the Western democracies and freedoms and rights wherever necessary with the leadership of the United States, of course.
Yeah, because when I talked to my mom, when I told my mom what happened in Afghanistan now, and etc., she was like, "Oh, yeah, of course, horrible." She immediately thought about women's rights, etc. And then when we talked about it, she was under the impression that this whole war started in the name of human rights, basically. And my mom tries to follow the news, etc. So I was quite weirded out by it, because usually she knows a bit more detailed things about the news, and so I looked it up, and there was this whole campaign around making it look like that. And that was also a big reason why a lot of Democrats in America went along with it. And it's just interesting to see
as the occupation started to grow longer and longer, it's of course difficult to keep on surfing in public opinion on the wave of anger and retaliation and vengeance for 9/11. So a more liberal and centrist story of building a nation state, creating a better society.
But that's the problem. They never build a nation state. If you would have built something, it wouldn't be just crumbling down immediately once you leave.
Kind of tried, and kind of also not, in the sense that there definitely was a lot of money funneled into Afghanistan.
Yeah, but was it always spent right, etc.?
No, that's the other point. Everything in terms of development always took a backseat to military goals and purposes, and blatant corruption and
but also things like I think we actually watched something about airplanes that they funded, and it was like this huge expense, like military airplanes. And the people in Afghanistan didn't really have the resources to learn how to maintain them, fly with them, etc.
There is two elements to it. There is the humanitarian development of society, and two, the Afghan army, which was being constructed or formed, and which was a disaster in and of its own. Yes, because when it comes to the society itself, they built schools in places where they didn't need schools. Development always took a backseat to military goals. Funding was handled by the military sometimes, who had no oversight. So that was terrible. And then when it comes specifically to the Afghan army, there was this magic number of 300,000, which they always tried to reach, with billions of investments indeed in training and in equipment. And a lot of training by a lot of military officers from the West, so from European countries and from America, which got a lot of praise for what they did. Seems now a bit hollow. But the Afghan army always suffered from high casualty rates, desertion, corruption. Like there is an entire phenomena which is being discussed, like of ghost soldiers, where commanders just basically say they have a number of soldiers, gain the salary for those soldiers, and then just pocket it themselves, and those soldiers don't ever really exist.
So it's been almost 20 years. Like it's been 20 years of war. They have spent $2 billion.
They spent way more.
I mean, America spent an estimated $2 billion on Afghanistan, 2.2 billion, and now we're back to where it started, or not? Like, was it just all for nothing, basically?
They killed Osama bin Laden in 2011. So, and actually, like after 2011, after like the whole operation when Obama killed Osama bin Laden, there was actually talks of withdrawal. There was a lot of forces being withdrawn from Afghanistan. I know it's ridiculous, but
so all of it just to kill one guy.
Yes, kind of. Also, but I also want to go back to like the whole, like how 2001 started. It's very problematic. It's very complicated, and obviously the American government has been doing a lot of let's ride the anger wave for imperialistic causes. It was never actually about justice or anything else. But there has been documents like the Taliban were like, okay, we acknowledge that Osama bin Laden is a criminal, so there was no need of proof. And they said that they are gonna limit his operations. I just want to like make clear that the Taliban has never been the poor good guys. Never. Ever.
I mean, of course not.
Like, never.
No. We can look at how their past rule went in a moment, but they definitely were.
I mean, it's never like what we just discussed. I don't think any of us ever think that the Taliban are the good guys here. I think it's more about like, was it justified to risk thousands of lives to kill one guy, or like to just
they
make
also
a
got
statement?
got a lot of oil. Got to Republicans got to enshrine their following in the U.S. by. Their political power has grown a lot. Like a lot of people argue if the whole 9/11 war thing, like the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan didn't happen, Bush wouldn't have been elected a second term, but he was.
I know, that's why a lot of people think Bush did. But like, I mean, that's a conspiracy theory. I just mean like there's a lot of people like.
Yeah, it's like it can't be like overstated how the Republican Party in the U.S. have been riding on that 9/11 anger till this day. Like, if there are two things you need to know about the Republican Party in the United States of America is the evangelical Reagan period. After, that whole area in the 70s and 60s, after the civil liberties movement, where, oh my God, Daddy Reagan, come make this country great again, basically. And afterwards, you have the Bush thing with post 9/11. Let's be the American Jeremiah sheriff that solve the world's problems and take vengeance. America, fuck yeah. But
what is that song? We'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way.
It's basically the follow-up to Speak Softly But Carry a Big Stick.
Basically, but what you ask at the end of the history section is, okay, after 20 years of war, are we back to where we started? And where we started is, in 2001, was a country that has been without infrastructure, have been one of the poorest countries in the world. It was ruled by the Taliban. And yes, we are back to where we started, but this is not where the Taliban story begins. I think if we want to talk about where the Taliban story begins, we must begin with at least when it comes to America, it starts with the CIA Operation Cyclone, where they basically supported the Taliban, supported all Mujahideen, supported anyone who would just fight the Soviets. China did the same. The European countries did the same. And it's one of those things that is, okay, let's look at how did the Soviets get in power anyway in Afghanistan? And yes, they also did the same thing. They basically invaded Afghanistan by supporting Soviets, socialist politicians in Afghanistan. It's just the whole thing with with how horrible the 2001 till now war has been. I don't know if it's the right place to start. This is about a history of imperialism and global fucking interference with a country without any regard to its citizens or its autonomy or its people.
Yeah,
it has always been a fucking war between Soviets and the rest of the world, and then rest of the world, and so nobody can say that. I don't know. It's just a bit complicated, and honestly, what do you even say now?
I mean, I would argue the answer is for the majority of it, yeah, it was basically all for fucking nothing because they didn't even manage to build decent roads in a lot of places. That's how fucking corrupt and incapable the entire operation went concerning building a state. Besides, building a state is a wrong objective in my opinion anyway, because the entire geography of Afghanistan and its cultural diversity of the people living within the territory doesn't allow for this monopolistic idea of a nation state, like one culture, one people, one state. That wouldn't work anyway, because the country is also cut in half by a mountain range and by terrain that doesn't allow for that way of administration. Instead, they could have maybe attempted to create a bottom-up political system, see what the people wanted, how the people would want to organize themselves, let that happen, strengthen that, let them form their own militias, see how that would have worked out and secured that.
How?
I'm not saying it could have worked. It's something. It is the matter of local resistance seems to have at least worked in northern Syria for some people. That's all I can say. When it comes to
but in Syria, Islamist extremism in Syria was never as strong or
I can't say
as
it
brutal as it was in Afghanistan. What you have to understand is the Afghani people have been brutalized for more than 40 years. They've been terrorized by this movement. I know it's. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, with all of the horrible imperialistic intentions of the US and the global community, I also would want to say that if we're looking at a country that is literally stoning women in the street, I would like to say that as an international community, we could be like, no, this is fucked up. And we should do something about it.
I think I'm fully with you. Continue.
I just think it's a very easy idea to be like, we shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Exactly. No, I fully agree. It's
like, it's not that easy.
No, exactly. Because, and that's that was the other point I was going to make. The positive thing, the one positive thing, is that they're once again, in the same way, and I'm not saying the communists did a good job in Afghanistan as a whole, but the same way they let people there experience their freedoms a little bit, the Americans and the occupation let people experience freedoms again in at least a certain area. Some people,
but
some
also
women
those
manage to
people
go to
are
school.
fucked now.
Yes, physically they're fucked, but now they have, and this is a very cynical point to make, I know, but it's not like in Western history, you know, the French Revolution happened out of nowhere and everything was good. No, that was a bloody massacre, you know, it was a horrible period for this continent, and it was built on more blood and more death than we can imagine. The same with, I mean, the Haitian Revolution also wasn't a nice bloodless thing. The point is, it built upon ideas and the experience people had, and the fact that they got to experience freedom a little bit more and more every time, and that they knew what they were fighting for, and thus at least had a collective memory of where they were going towards, and a defense of said rights, I think gave them a stronger chance than if they wouldn't have had any of those ideas. I think there is at least a potential seed in Afghanistan with the people having experienced those things to organize to in the future.
Of course, but also a lot of
Form
them
again.
just had to go into hiding now because
Yes, but they exist now. 20 years ago, they were literally not allowed to exist. Anyone not following the Islamic Sharia laws was being executed in the street.
And
now that's happening again.
That's happening again, but that doesn't mean the 20 years of war are very complicated and very brutal. I would like to think that some of those people who died in Afghanistan, some of those Americans, some of those generals making decisions tried to make something good out of it. The 20 years of war have been 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, and 4 years of Trump, and 2 years of Biden.
Mm-hmm.
We generally regard Obama as not a so bad president of the US. We generally look at him in a positive light.
It's easy to do that if you have Bush and Trump.
I know. I'm just saying that we look at what Obama did, and I do think in that 8 years period regarding foreign policy, regarding Afghanistan, regarding Iraq, he did try. And there was a genuine try of, okay, we are in this mess, and if we pull out now, we're kind of fucking these people over. And I think that was the motivation for them to stay this long. Then Trump came. And I hate to say it, but I think Trump have taken a very, I don't know what to call it. It's kind of brave for a US president to be like, you know what? Fuck this war. I'm out. You know, think of Trump saying that I do not want the violence to continue.
Yeah.
I don't want to go hard on terrorists. I want to sit down with the Taliban and talk to them.
I see what you're getting at.
I mean, they're both have similar ideas on women's rights. So.
They do. But it's not like the Democrats have been...
let's point out that Biden's policy is basically the same as Trump's at the moment.
Literally.
Blatant isolationism. And I think, that's the thing I am kind of opposed to, because now you hear indeed a lot of the left screaming like, oh, we should have gone, and yes, it's good that we leave it. Bullshit that you think it's good that we are leaving. First of all, everyone has an intrinsic gut feeling that this is a wrong thing to do, because we do see, you know, we get the numbers of the people that die right now. We all know the images of what the Taliban did last time. We'll go over them in a moment. We all know, we get the reports at the moment of how people are feeling and what they are experiencing under Taliban rule already again. It is horrible, it is horrifying, and everything that was built there is being completely destroyed indeed. So fuck that bullshit of it's good that we're leaving.
One more thing.
I hear it a lot.
An implication of thousands of refugees going to mainland Europe, going to neighboring countries in the Middle East. The US being, well, they can't reach the US.
Yeah, which is where the EU countries are clearly being pissed about, among other things. But so first and foremost, no. And I think it's important to state this because historically,
But
the
honestly,
left has not been...
I've heard no one say that they're happy that we're leaving.
I'll hook you up with things. Let's start with David Pacman, for example, who has been strongly saying Biden is correct to leave. This is what we should have done a long time ago. This is all good. Yeah, sure. I'm not a fan of American state imperialism either, but the Afghans have always said, yes, we want foreign troops to leave. If our own government is capable of maintaining all the gains we have gotten so far.
Yeah.
And historically, and I feel like I need to really point this out because the left is becoming more and more stupid, it seems, with every day. The slogan is, workers of the world unite. It is intrinsically imperialistic because it says, it calls for international solidarity. That is why there were so many, internationals, as a way to organize. Anyone that ever pretends to be anything remotely socialist or anything basically can say that the US should fully abandon the place, or everyone, the international community, should abandon Afghanistan and let Afghanistan, like any other country, be a complete isolated unit, because that is fucking wrong. That is absolutely fucking wrong.
It is. And fuck also this fucking America first bullshit from Biden. When lefties hear it from Trump, they're like, fuck this, we are a global humanity program. And when Biden says it, suddenly they're like, yes, he's the American president. He's only concerned with American lives.
That is extreme hypocrisy. And it needs to be pointed out.
It's something that Biden himself said. He said, I am the president of the United States of America, and I'm only concerned with American lives.
But I mean, we all know that Biden was one of the most conservative candidates on that election.
But at the same time, if you go back in his, if you do for any politician other than Bernie Sanders, if you look at their previous statements and their previous voting history.
Sanders has apologized for agreeing to the war.
Indeed.
Because he was also pro. But yeah.
Biden has always been like, we have a plan. We don't have, like, right now he's like saying that this whole fucking debacle that's how the way it was planned all along. And that is just bullshit. This is, I think what Tom said about this internal gut feeling that we're having this is bad. It shouldn't be ignored. This is our bodies and our collective state of mind being like, this is wrong. Of course, 20 years of imperial war is wrong. But
yeah, it was absolutely motherfuckingly handled in the worst possible way and done for the worst possible intentions. But that doesn't take away that.
I like this analogy. I read it on Twitter the other day. Let's say I stab you in the stomach right now with a knife. Is it better to keep the knife in or to take it out?
Well, if you take it out,
you will
please don't let me bleed out, because that is equally bad.
Yes, you will literally bleed. But I'd be like, I pulled out. It's all done. I shouldn't have stabbed you in the first place, so I'm just gonna pull the knife out.
And that's, I guess, what it comes down to. It's two sides of the same coin that we're seeing. You fucked the Afghans over by invading and doing it the way you did, and now you're fucking them over by abandoning them on the side of the street.
Also, translators, everybody who collaborated with the US government is being abandoned by the US.
I mean, they got some people out, but yes, a lot of them.
Because of the catastrophic way of doing it. And I've been saying that we would go over how the Taliban ruled. Let's do it for a moment. So the Taliban are an ultra-conservative, or a group that has an ultra-conservative interpretation of Islam. And they, of course, include Sharia law, or a very conservative and horrible interpretation of Sharia law.
Now they're being cute, you see. They have a public relations department.
Bullshit. Yeah, they're very good. They're smart.
They even have did you hear about the WhatsApp group?
Oh yeah, they have a WhatsApp helpline number for any concerned Afghan citizen.
Yes, I did hear that. Last time, though, they were in charge, they banned a wide variety of activities, which includes, but is not limited to, movies, TV, music, dancing, kite flying, weirdly specific. Beard trimming, alcohol, Christmas cards, also weirdly specific. Nail polish, computers, etc. Women especially were treated badly, so badly that it has its own Wikipedia page specially dedicated to it. They were banned from all education and work. You know, Malala told us about that. Remember her? She got shot in the head because of what she did. Yeah, a child.
Well, she wanted to educate herself.
They were also not allowed to wear stimulating or attractive clothing. Oh, God. They can't take a taxi without male company. And in one case, the Taliban demanded people blacken the windows of their houses so the women couldn't be seen from the outside.
And that is the last time Taliban was in power, indeed.
Yeah, and in law, if you stole something, your hand got chopped off. And if you were an adulterer, you
Get stoned
got
in the
stoned.
street.
No, also sometimes in a stadium with an audience. Because
It's very fun.
obviously,
It's a spectacle.
that is, I think, objectively
Yeah,
an inferior society.
Also,
to
if you
ours.
want to learn something as a woman, you were encouraged to just ask your husband because you were not supposed to do research.
Encourage is a very soft word.
Yes.
encourage
Also,
with bullets.
like, forget all of this, you know, like, also, this is horrible, obviously, don't forget about it, but forget about all of this. Let's look at when the last time Taliban was in power, that was 1999, something like that, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They took power after like 40 years of destructive civil war. The country was left with no infrastructure, no lights. Afghani people were literally the poorest people in the world. And when NGOs and helpers out of European countries or anybody who wanted to do charity for these people, on several occasions, the Taliban refused these helps because there was, with the charity people, there was a UK woman that was not accompanied by a man. The NGOs actually tried to appease these people by sending Muslim women to help. And the Taliban doubled down and was like, well, you can't send a woman without her male chaperone. So we are talking about I hate to have to indulge in responding to these people every time I talk about this, but you see it a lot on the left. People who are like, we shouldn't enforce our Western ideology on these people. Let them have their traditions. Let them have, I don't know, whatever the fuck you want to talk about. Fuck that. This is the worst. And you have a moral obligation to be like, this is fucked up and we should change this. You can't be like, it's their tradition. It's none of our business. I am a lefty, which means I do not condone any imperial colonizing. And it's like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah, exactly.
Shut the fuck up. Honestly, shut the fuck up. Because, yes, we all acknowledge colonies. We all acknowledge colonizing history. We all acknowledge imperialism.
Yes, clearly a bad thing. We all agree.
Yes, we all.
However,
stop trying to be like, but the Taliban is the Afghani people.
And it's incoherent because it is inherently anti-feminist. You're saying women's rights are not natural. Like they're not a universal thing.
You will literally find a fucking tanky being like, I am an LGBTQ activist who is in support of the Maoist Communist Party and the Islamic State right of ruling. Black Lives Matter. And I just can't stand it.
No.
Because this is someone who has never had to look at what these fucking degenerates do. These people are, you know, like, I think of myself as a person who is very well versed in like the US history of imperialism and just the fucking UK or the great empire of Britain, which is
Britannia rules the waves.
you know, like, you know, did you know that the most common this is a side fact. Did you know that the most common holiday on the world is the independence from the British?
Doesn't surprise me.
It's literally the most common celebrated holiday in the world.
Wow. It says, yeah.
So I am no stranger to the horrible of imperialism, but these fucking right-wing extreme Muslims are on another level of dystopia.
Mm-hmm.
It's so bad. it's sexual slavery. It's
Yes, I mean imperialism also did all those things, but yes, like I just mean like, do we have to make one worse than the other to say that both of them are fucking horrible?
I do think so, because somehow, like, we obviously didn't abolish imperialism. We obviously didn't abolish colonization. We just made it into an economical way. And for better or worse, somehow that resulted in less executions. It resulted in less slavery. We still have slavery.
Yes.
We have wage slavery. We have people being denied healthcare.
And
But
also,
it resulted in a society that is actually somehow not resistant to improvement. This system, even so fucked up, you know me. I hate capitalism with every fiber of my being. I have to admit, if I put it next to a Sharia law country that is operating on the fucking idea that Islam word is rules, it is at least not impervious to fucking improvement. That's law.
I know, but now you're equating capitalism to imperialism, and although those are two,
But isn't capitalism the extension of imperialism? Let's be real.
well,
of course,
it's inherently imperialistic, but that's
of course, yes.
theoretical
But also, I think it's problematic to be like to equate wage slavery, like you called it, to Sharia law when we're actually like. I just don't like that you're putting, for example, the slavery that happened in the US, where there was also sex slavery. There were also no rights for a huge group of people. And you're saying that that was somehow better now because
No, I'm talking modern history. I'm talking, let's say, 1930, post 1930. You know, like when I'm trying to refute that fucking sentiment in the left of everything that happened, that is done by Western countries after 1930 is bad. And it's like, okay, grown up, okay, now let's go back to school. And let's acknowledge that this is not how the world works.
Yes. I'm just like, because I know you, I just want to point out that it's important to maintain nuance.
Of course.
in the phase of nuance, I do want to draw attention to one thing, because we continue, and rightfully so, talk a lot about about America, under Biden and Trump. But you know, let's talk about that coalition for a moment, which means Europe for a big part.
Yes.
There has been a very dubious relationship recently, or at least relationship has been shaken because of the withdrawal. First and foremost, let's say the European powers are equally guilty in all of what is happening right now because they were fully there, fully present, and agreed to everything they fucking did.
Are you talking about NATO?
Yes. Second, though,
I can just see someone arguing like, well, NATO is basically US ruled. Did
Yes,
the
but
Europeans
then-
actually have any choice?
they could step out of NATO or at least
True.
force NATO to make a different move. But let's point that. However, there has been a bit of bad blood between the European powers and the US over this, it seems, because allies were not aware of the faster withdrawal that Biden pushed for. Were astounded, and especially the British were fiercely debating it in Parliament to the point where the majority parties were angry at their own government, which doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah, but it did. But yeah, basically this is happening because where do we go from here? What's the backlash that is going to result in? I think is it fair to say that mostly the Europeans are concerned with refugees? This is the hot topic.
Potentially, but also I think there was a serious military annoyance because when you suddenly hear that the US is withdrawing and therefore the Taliban is making offensives everywhere and your own army hasn't been able to pull out yet and you haven't had your airplanes ready to evacuate your civilians and you all have to do it like
yes, there's clearly a
head over heels.
But I think like the US have been talking about this withdrawal for years.
No, but apparently some countries were really astonished, and Berlin and London reacted especially angry.
Yeah.
Merkel was not that happy in her last days of office, and neither was, for example, Theresa May and the Conservative Party in Great Britain. They were astonished, and Johnson seems to have played it off as I was aware, but nobody was really buying it that he was aware. So
That's weird.
Some ex-diplomats apparently speak about treason between the US and its NATO allies.
Wow. So so they're annoyed. What do we do now?
But I guess it's what you pointed out. The big concern of the EU countries seems to be, at least right now that things have cooled down a bit or things are coming to an end, what about all those refugees potentially coming our way?
Well, Gen Z doesn't want to have children anyway, so I think we kind of need the babies.
Don't give ammunition to the right wing who are arguing about white genocide.
I mean, our biology teacher told us in school, all the blonde kids, all the redheads, in 100 years you won't exist anymore. I don't know if this is factually correct. I'm just saying, like, our biology teacher was like very dry about that.
Your biology teacher was spending way too much time on Reddit.
Probably.
So do we think that...
Let me just clarify. He didn't say that as in, like, that's a bad thing. He just said, like, that's just, like...
Just a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He even said, like, because those are recessive genes and it's kind of bad to not mix your genes that much. So it's, like, better to mix your genes more. So it's, like...
Again, economically, migration is also very positive.
Yes.
That's, for example, how Belgium rebuilt itself after 2 world wars.
And we've had Afghani immigrants and Afghani refugees forever. There was a protest by young Afghani Belgians, was it?
In Brussels, asking for, indeed, support for those that do flee the country right now, those people that did have ties to the Western Alliance, which included Belgian soldiers as part of NATO, and for them to hopefully get refuge in Belgium or in another European country. So far, though, I mean, for the longest period, at least 3 countries in Europe wanted to, one among them being the Netherlands and Austria, I believe. Another one wanted to continue to send people back to Afghanistan, if the procedures were finished and they didn't get citizenship here or a visa to stay here. That has been overturned by, I believe, the European Union. What is also interesting is that a lot of European states are already kind of singing to the tune of let's negotiate with the Taliban, which is, a disgusting attitude because it's...
you can't see it because you're listening, not watching a video. I am showing a face of disgust.
I mean, of course, when it comes to pure power politics, I get it. If you're trying to save more people, that might be a move you have to make if military intervention is completely out of the question. But it is still, I mean, let's acknowledge the pure fucking disgust of that it is from we are trying to build a country where human rights are respected to let's negotiate with the Taliban. It's definitely.
I don't know if this would help anybody who's listening. Just imagine if this wasn't happening in Afghanistan. Imagine if Nazi Germany decided to not expand its borders, but to stay within.
And consolidate
and consolidate. Would you be fine with negotiating with the Nazi government?
I mean, that's exactly what happened until Germany then decided to expand.
That is the appeasement politics of Britain and France for the longest time.
But again, right now in the 21st century, as a citizen, I want you to ask yourself...
This is bad.
Yeah.
Who could have known that?
Also, by the way, in that sense, in that regard, Taliban is not going to be satisfied with this one piece of land. Their doctrine is based on the idea of making the whole world under Sharia law. Not to be fear-mongering here, but that's kind of like intertwined with the whole Sharia thing. Is a day of reckoning where the whole world will be ruled under the flag of Islam.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see because Russia has positive relations with the Taliban. China is already putting itself constructively as well, saying like, yeah, we don't see a problem with negotiating with them, which of course the ginormous Chinese bureaucracy, of course, and Communist Party has no scruples about, because that thing is devoid of human emotion, like the Borg from Star Trek. So it will be interesting to see. Of course, NGOs and in general, the left is already calling for, Afghan refugees are welcome in Europe. Of course, they're welcome. I just feel like we're back to the same weak rhetoric that we have with so many other countries. Refugees are welcome.
But to be fair, if, like you said, if military intervention is not an option, which it's not at the moment, what else are you going to do?
I honestly don't think it shouldn't be an option. I think it should be back on the table.
Yeah,
military intervention.
I mean, I think the demand from the public out should be on the table.
Wait, the demand. Sorry,
I think that a public. I think that within public opinion or public protest, that can actually be a demand.
Oh, I see what
it is. Maybe it isn't on the table for, like, let's say, a Belgian army on its own, but I think there definitely could be a push to say to the NATO, you have to. This is not okay anymore, what you did. And this time, under the strictest of control or something, or ask for a UN mandate or something, but this is not.
I mean, we've had so many wars in this century, and they have always been for a bad reason. They've always been about appeasing a sense of vengeance in the US, for example, invasion of Iraq. We have wars being pushed because some people want to sell weapons. I think if you already buy all of the weapons and if you already have all of this, might as well. I'm usually like, me, like I am the last person to be negotiating for war. But I do think a military intervention with an actual clear plan of what do we do next is something that we should be talking about.
I mean, also, and that's something we can't forget, there is one province at the moment still holding on, Panjshir, which has historically defied the Taliban as well. It is also because of its geography. Partially, it basically has one way in and out. But maybe there is, in some sense, an option to have. I mean, let's be honest. The US has instigated rebellions everywhere.
Literally, you can literally find a Wikipedia page with all of the CIA instigated rebellions.
It's not outside of the of the ability of Western countries to organize a people somewhere else.
I just don't, we don't need a fucking secret under the table CIA operation here. What we need is a clear sent message of, do you as European citizens, do you as American citizens want a military intervention in Afghanistan? I think this should be a question that is being asked directly.
But I have to say, a part of me, I know I can't really place why, but it does feel wrong to just go in there guns blazing too.
Because you've been told that for the longest of time, and war is never a good option.
For the longest of time, that was a correct position.
And we have been told that, and the entire narrative on the left is that, and the entire narrative in which we live is that of nation states with the right of sovereignty. Mm-hmm. But sovereignty doesn't mean bullshit like that when things like that happen, in my opinion. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
it's if that started happening, if we had a group like that, let's put the question: if Drisha and his if the local right-wing nut jobs started to try and take control of the government in Belgium, I would want the Netherlands to invade.
I mean, of course.
If Gilead was real, we wouldn't want Canada to invade.
Yeah, like
I just think it's really that fucking simple. This is a place where human rights are being not only trampled on, they're being erased.
I guess the reason why it also just feels iffy is not because in the hypothetical sense, it would be I wouldn't agree with it, but I just can't see a world where a military force like NATO or the US, whatever, will do this without
Fucking up.
fucking up and
I
having
agree with that. I don't think the NATO or
I
a
get it.
state can do it.
I get it, but it's not about that. It should be about, like the story that the colonizers talked about, like in 1930, 1948, when France and the British Empire were like, okay, we're going to take care of this country. We're going to lead them to an independence, but we're also going to build their infrastructure. And a version of that to happen in Afghanistan is something I would like to see. That's what I'm saying. At the time, it happened because of want for political power. It was a resources thing. They wanted the oil, they wanted the land, they wanted the power that comes with being the mandate power. I know this is naive, but I think if it's a war based on actual moral objections to what's happening, that's going to be a kind of war that is less fucked up.
I think maybe a part of like what I'm thinking about too is, like how just a lot of past conflicts have been painted like, oh, we're going to save these people. Like think of Vietnam, like that was also kind of portrayed of like, yeah, we're going to like do something good for these people. But the people didn't want it. So it was kind of a huge failure.
Yeah, but nobody's asking the Afghani people now. And I think if you could ask them, nobody wants to live under the Taliban, other than the Taliban themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
This is not the Afghani people choosing to live under Sharia law. This is Sharia law being imposed on them.
Yeah.
This is I know it's very weird. It's like might be the first time in history where our position is like, yes, there should be military intervention. I think that's all I have to say about it. Honestly, it's kind of. I would also support military intervention in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where the UN sends some military people to solve that conflict. And
Is that going to happen? Of course not.
Of course not.
And neither is
I'm
it
just
going
saying
to
that
happen probably in Afghanistan because UN is a broken system and blah 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 blah. But
obviously not. Just I want to be careful about the idea of, well, we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Let's
Exactly.
leave it as it is, and that is just gonna come and bite you back in the ass.
I mean,
it's gonna
yeah,
bite
but
you
I
back in the
think-
ass in a refugee way. It's gonna bite you in the back in the ass. Like, do you think if the Taliban is actually a strong state, they wouldn't continue to do terrorist shit?
I mean, of course, no, but like what I mean is, I agree with you. I agree with you, but I just don't see it happening. And I feel like it's kind of sad to leave it on this hypothetical,
It's not impossible to happen.
Let's
You have
not
to-
leave it on the hypothetical. I think it should be a full-on goal and demand of progressives everywhere to work towards and demand a international system,
And-
probably through something like the UN that actually functions and allows for international solidarity, because that should be our aim and goal, in the ability to have and show international solidarity in times like these. And if that is sometimes with clinking and weapons and guns blazing, because the opponent is also a fucking warlord or an organization that makes war simply. If it is fascists running around with guns, then so be it. But as long as it is, of course, with all the
it's just like the
overall
point of
side.
this first step, if you want to call it, is to get us to agree, because I think as I don't know, leftists, we have always been on the side of all of these wars that have been done by NATO, by the US, by these Western powers have all been wrong. And we've been so used to the idea of this war is wrong. Let's do hippie shit. And it's a bit, we need to grow out of it. We need to say, before we go to the streets, before we go to our decision makers, we have to agree within ourselves. Are we actually willing to take the risk in trusting our militaries to go there and fix this? do we actually want this? Is this what we want? Are we comfortable? Like, we have to be comfortable with it. And I think
if not, it's another point to work towards, and
Yes.
that is, it should be identified as in, okay, we're clearly not comfortable with the military of our state. We don't trust them. Why not? What is the alternative? How can we adapt that? It's an important part.
honestly, anything but the idea of let's just leave it, it's not our business anymore. My job is to get US citizens safe, Biden. That should be
There are people born under the occupation of America in Afghanistan. Kind of counts, in my opinion, as his citizens.
yes.
The US occupied that territory for 20 years. It is basically part of the US in that sense. It has an obligation.
And you
towards
don't
those
get to be
people.
like, fuck this, I'm out.
I mean, yeah, I think we all agree on that.
We do agree on that. It's just, it is that kind of uncomfortable feeling in your guts. That's like, do I trust my government to wage war and to make this better? And clearly, it's not that comfortable. And like Tom said, that's a question that you should be asking yourself. You should be like, why don't I trust my government to make the right thing and to wage a right war?
I mean, in Belgium, like, there is also Nazis in the government.
Well, yeah,
Partially.
there is one.
And meanwhile, because that's not going to happen anytime soon, we should be also being like, okay, Afghani people, you're not fucked. You're also welcome. I know it's a
Yeah.
weak narrative,
Yeah,
but
of course.
It should remain the basis, but we
should.
can't leave it to that. But it definitely should be a part,
Yeah.
and it should be organized as well. It can't just be rhetoric either. It should.
But yeah, I think we have something to think about here, because also with Hungary, we also discussed this entity, this hypothetical entity, maybe UN rules that could intervene when human rights are being destroyed in a country like Hungary, like Poland, considering LGBT and women's issues, like Turkey with like withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention. Now again, we see it in Afghanistan.
yeah. And maybe it's not military. You can also choke out the Taliban economically by like if you that's one of the poorest countries in the world. They're not gonna last. But that means punishing citizens.
That means indeed, and
Also, they mostly deal in drugs.
basically. And also their neighbors like Pakistan, India
Iran.
are very dodgy. Very, very, very fucking
Yeah.
dodgy. And they will not have problems with sanctions. So
let's just agree that there is I do think it's important to acknowledge that it's maybe needed to discuss military forces that are not ruled by national interest, but by
Yes.
humanitarian needs, and solely by that.
Yes.
Soldiers Without Borders. I'm coining the name. It's copyrighted. You have to come to me and pay
I
me.
think that's kind of the point of the blue helmets. Of
That's what you call
UN.
them?
Yeah, because they have blue helmets.
The peacekeeping troops.
Oh yeah, the
the UN peacekeeping
troops.
troops.
Peacekeeping
Yeah.
troops.
That's what
yeah.
they call them.
Oh, in Dutch we call them blue helmets.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
But
Creative dumb name.
These troops
No,
have
in English you can also call them
the blue helmets, but
They have
they been deployed? Like
Yes.
I remember them being deployed on the Israeli-Syrian border,
few times.
but like
yeah.
they have been
very
so
few,
limited.
very few. But yeah, it's
Something in that vein would be amazing.
exactly.
Fuck NATO. I want blue helmets. Imagine all of that funding in the hands
Going
of
to the UN instead of
Yeah.
NATO, would be.
and that's basically my point. It's like
Yeah, and then we're thinking also more globally, because we're not like NATO was kind of built to stop, the big red.
the NATO is a
Communist.
US Western coalition
Yes.
that is basically we are the big daddy of military.
it's
And
a feudal system.
if we're being honest, it's basically the US with a 57% power and all of the other members with the rest.
Yeah.
So if the US wants to do something in NATO, they do it. Look
not
at the,
Yeah.
Really?
And if we can agree on one more thing, I feel like nobody in Europe really trusts the US entirely.
Anymore. I don't think
Yeah.
anymore. I feel like there has been a decent shockwave going through Europe of
Yeah.
being like,
I mean, how can you
Maybe
trust a
those
country that
guys-
alternates between extreme right wing and at best centrism.
To be fair, they did save us twice in a world war.
Yeah, which
And then they kind of bought us
but like that's the thing, like yes,
with their recovery plan.
But that US doesn't exist anymore.
No, that is true. I think that is the big realization.
Yeah.
The US is starting to change, and it's
It
starting
has. I
it's-
think
and what it's still going. It's still going on. It seems to become a bit more like crazy, but like in the sense of it seems to become nervous over its competition.
it's anarcho-capitalism.
It's
I think what you need to think
Okay,
about
but I
is
think-
in. Let me just make that one point. I think when the US intervened in World War II, that was not a decision made by Amazon. That was a decision made by the US government.
yeah.
In 2021, I think Amazon have like it's not just Amazon. Obviously, this is just a symbol for how
No. I see what
how
you mean.
intertwined the idea of corporations in decision making in the US.
yeah. And that's another topic. So let's keep again this idea of blue helmets kind of force in mind, and see you guys next week to talk about a new, maybe a bit less depressing topic.
A new depressing topic, maybe
Or
Texas
maybe just as
reverting abortion
God.
laws.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Soon we will need that force to invade parts of the US probably.